Allen Lund Company looks forward to seeing you at Matt's in March.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
What do truckers want? Is it better pay, home time, or better treatment? And which factors will help companies retain those drivers and reduce turnover? Two companies, PDA, or the Professional Driver Agency, and Conversion Interactive Agency, conducted a survey that said a lot about the importance of those factors and others. Priscilla Peters of Conversion IA joins us to provide some insight. Also on today's program, optimism is growing in the spot market this week. Brent Hutto with TruckStop says with strength continuing to grow in the U.S. economy, trucking will become a better profitability market for all transportation companies. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We begin with the push to delay Oregon's advanced clean trucks rules from going into full effect. An Oregon House committee last week heard arguments for and against House Bill 3119, which would delay implementation of the controversial rule by 2 years as the trucking industry struggles to meet requirements for Class 7 and 8 trucks. Oregon is one of 5 states to begin advanced clean trucks this year, the first batch of states to do so since California started the regulation last year. The rule requires 7% of new Class 7 and 8 tractor truck sales to be zero direct emission trucks, ramping up to 40% by 2032. And while advanced clean truck sales targets only apply to manufacturers, those same manufacturers are requiring dealers to sell 1 electric truck before they can order about 13 diesel trucks in order to stay compliant. There is virtually zero demand for zero-emission Class 7 and 8 trucks, forcing dealers to cancel diesel truck orders due to lack of inventory. Lawmakers and stakeholders supporting and opposing a delay stated their case before the committee. Those supporting delaying advanced clean trucks brought up a lack of charging infrastructure, technological infeasibility, and costs. HB 3119 sponsor, State Rep Shelley Bossart Davis, told the committee that Oregon has just 1 public charging station for heavy-duty trucks.
Charging infrastructure. We don't have it. What is required to support a widespread transition to zero-emission vehicles in the medium and heavy-duty sector is simply not there. Even if the state would be willing to spend the money needed to install these chargers throughout the state and somehow change the land use laws to park all of these trucks somewhere to charge and change the federal hours of service laws to allow these truck drivers to be able to rest while charging and still complete their normal haul, and had the money to invest in companies upgrading their fleets to EVs that cost twice as much, and started that all today, it would be years before this would happen, and the rules are already implemented.
Bossart Davis added that electric trucks cost twice as much as diesel trucks but haul 25% less while traveling about half the distance.
The math doesn't math.
The state rep submitted a chart showing the massive improvements in diesel engine emission standards over the decades. She said the industry has been doing a great job addressing emissions without regulatory pressure.
Today's truck is not a truck from the 80s rolling coal. As the daughter of a trucker and the now owner of the trucking company he started, I have watched this transition my entire life. It's an understatement to say trucks we're driving today are cleaner than when my dad started driving in the 80s. It's not even comparable. This progress demonstrates the industry's commitment to environmental stewardship while maintaining the reliability and performance that working people rely on.
Bossart Davis and others supporting HB 3119 said the bill is a simple compromise, allowing the technology to catch up with the rules.
Colleagues, this is an easy solution. It's a layup. We have a chance to delay rules that require Oregon businesses to sell products that don't exist without support and that people don't want. If they did, these mandates wouldn't be needed.
On the other side of things, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality argued it's too late to delay advanced clean trucks and added that the technology is ready. 2 manufacturers testified against delaying advanced clean trucks, Rivian and Tesla. Although HB 3119 is gaining some traction, it may not be needed. President Trump recently signed an executive order that seeks to eliminate what he called electric vehicle mandates. It includes terminating state emissions waivers that function to limit sales of gasoline-powered automobiles, something that could put advanced clean trucks on the chopping block. PACCAR is recalling thousands of Kenworth and Peterbilt trucks of various models after discovering an issue with the hazard lights. The recall affects more than 5,000 model year 2023 through 2026 Kenworth and Peterbilt trucks. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, those trucks may have a faulty exterior lighting switch, something that could cause malfunctions with hazard lights and the instrument display backlight brightness. PACCAR estimates that only about 1% of the more than 5,000 trucks involved in the recall have the problem. Notification letters to the owners of affected trucks go out at the end of March. Dealers will inspect and, if necessary, fix the problem for free. Continued strength is how TruckStop is describing current market conditions. Brent Hutto with TruckStop explains that pressure in the marketplace is dipping back under 70.
About 50 to 55 is the normal, so we're still above what the normal sort of pressure. And then what I mean by that is that load posting volumes kind of went back up again, so it's only maybe about 3% below normal, which means it's normal. Rates stayed at about 228 overall, with van kind of correcting back down, and that's come down from 210 to 201. Flatbed went up about 4 cents to 232. Refrigerated dropped from 247 to 237. There's going to be ebbs and flows in this market, as you and I have talked the last couple of weeks, that you're going to have some ups and downs in rates. So just watch them as they sequentially move up, though, and that's really the key.
More from Brent Hutto and TruckStop each and every week right here on Landline Now. Police in Pennsylvania say they're investigating after someone lifted a large shipment of organic eggs off a trailer. It happened over the weekend in Greencastle. Pennsylvania State Police say a total of 100,000 eggs were stolen from the trailer that was parked outside of a business. Current retail value of the stolen eggs was around $40,000. It's a new twist on a string of cargo thefts throughout Pennsylvania and the rest of the country. And while meat has been targeted in many of those cases, the rising price of eggs may be catching the attention of thieves looking for a lucrative score. Speed cameras are coming to Colorado. The state DOT announcing the plans earlier this year. Now they're putting them into motion. Construction zones will be the first to get the speed cameras this spring after the number of deadly crashes in those areas nearly doubled last year. If that works, CDOT plans to use the cameras in other trouble spots as well. Exact locations for the speed cameras have not been mentioned yet, but Denver 7 reports that Floyd Hill is being floated as a possible starting point. Colorado law requires drivers to be notified at least 300 feet before approaching a speed camera. The law also requires warnings for the first 30 days. After that, speeders will get hit with fines starting at $45. Tickets will be sent by mail. And finally, the American Transportation Research Institute is turning to truckers for feedback on several key issues surrounding truck parking at public rest areas. The outreach begins with ATRI's new Public Truck Parking Driver Survey. The Institute said it's currently working with departments of transportation in all 50 states to identify best practices for expanding truck parking at public rest areas and other state-owned locations. The brief 12-question survey will help guide that discussion. ATRI is asking for feedback on several things like parking information systems and the repurposing of state-owned facilities for parking. ATRI's final report will include an assessment of how states are doing at providing parking and will highlight best practices for expanding parking at public rest facilities. For a link to participate, head on over to our website, landlinenow.com. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. You can write and post a review of the doctor who performed your DOT physical to be shared with other truckers through the OOIDA website, ooida.com. Just go to the main menu at the upper left corner of the page and under Resources, click on Certified Medical Examiner Review. Again, that's at ooida.com. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the TA Truck Stop in Phoenix, Arizona. That's located at exit 137 on Interstate 10. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, I'll discuss a survey on pay, home time, and other retention factors in trucking with Priscilla Peters of Conversion IA, and we'll hear from Brent Hutto of TruckStop. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit capitalreman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline now. Welcome back. What do truckers want? Is it better pay, home time, better treatment? And which one of those factors will help companies retain those drivers and reduce turnover? Two companies, PDA or the Professional Driver Agency and Conversion Interactive Agency, conduct some regular surveys, and the most recent one revealed a significant amount of information regarding the relative importance of those factors. To get some insight into the survey results, I spoke with Priscilla Peters, the Chief Marketing Officer of Conversion IA. Obviously, you were trying to get at certain things by doing this survey. What was your goal? What were you trying to get at overall with this?
Yeah, so we do 2 surveys a year just to really kind of educate our not only our customers, but really the industry as a resource to just kind of find out what's going on in the driver market. Specifically with this survey, there's a couple of questions that we always ask. Like we always ask, are you looking for a job? Like this is a recruiting and retention kind of piece of content, if you will. So we always ask that just to keep a pulse on, what that's looking like. But we also wanted to know, when you're looking for a job, why or why not are you looking? And what are you the most focused on? How do you feel about the upcoming year? Because this was our fall 2024 survey. So and then sometimes we have carriers that will reach out to us and say, hey, we specifically kind of want to know this. And a few of them were asking, a lot of times carriers are trying to make this decision of how do I balance home time options with pay? So that was kind of a key thing that we focused on. So just really roundabout what's going on in the driver market. We just like to keep a pulse on that and see what drivers have to say. And then carriers like to see that and get some good insight regarding that.
Well, as you mentioned, there's a lot of interesting information and statistics in there. But one of the first and most interesting to me was the ages of those responding. Can you walk us through what you found in terms of the people responding and their ages?
Yes. So from an age perspective, really, the bulk of the survey respondents were between 36 and 65. So that kind of, however you want to define middle age, right? But that kind of age, framework between 36 and 65, I would say it's probably pretty in line with just drivers in general. You can look at different sources and how they talk about age, but we clearly, have a aging workforce when it comes to drivers. And so, but we like to ask their age. We didn't do that early on a few years ago, and we started doing that just so that, folks who are looking at the survey can kind of understand the context around that.
In looking at those age stats myself, it was interesting to me that a lot of what you found, 33%, about a third, are over 56 or 56 and over, I guess more precisely. But 64% were from 26 to 46 years old. And I'm very curious, in your mind, we've had kind of concerns expressed in the industry about the trucker workforce aging. Does this indicate that perceived crisis is either over or maybe just exaggerated in the first place?
Maybe it might be exaggerated a little, but from our standpoint, the thing that I look at the most is the lower numbers in the 26 to 35 and the 18 to 25, which we know 18-year-olds are not driving interstate, right? But those two and the low numbers of those two kind of put together is something that just kind of jumps out to me. So and these are kind of wide ranges, like 36 to 45, that's 10 years, but I would just say from a carrier perspective in particular, and honestly, just industry wide, we have to figure out, how are we going to get the younger generation into the industry? But to your point, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was. And this is just a sample of drivers. We've got about 1,900 total responses. So, but I think it probably reflects the industry, but you might be right. I've never thought about if it's exaggerated or not. So that's an interesting take on that, I think.
I want to get into some of the other stats here. And of course, people looking for a job, that's a big part of what you were looking at. And it looked like about 60% said they were not looking for a job currently, which is kind of at odds with the actual turnover figures in the industry. How does this figure compare with previous years?
Yeah, so when you look at, and we did include some of the previous data, but this is the highest percentage of drivers that have said they were currently looking for a job since we started doing these surveys about 3 years ago. So I know, so the 40% in our context is high. Now, I don't think that you can necessarily say that there's a one-to-one kind of look at, who's looking for a job and the retention rate. What I will say is one of the things that we've learned just honestly over the years is that someone might not be looking for a job today, but they might have an event tomorrow that, they do start looking. So we just like to get a good snapshot of who is looking in the spring and then who is looking in the fall. But this was the highest percentage that we have had on record, the 40.7% that are currently looking. So, and I know we've kind of been in a downturn. I think traditionally turnover is better when freight isn't as good, but as freight improves and rebounds, I do think that turnover will creep up as well. That's typically what happens.
Some of these folks indicated, I guess, in the survey why they were looking, if they were looking. What are some of the big reasons that you found among the people you surveyed?
Yes. So, predictable pay tends to be at the top of the list almost every time we do the survey. I would say kind of the usual suspects, if you will, predictable pay, better home time, things like that. But I think what's important to think about from a predictable pay standpoint is the predictability of it. So one of the things that it's just kind of risen to the top of concerns for drivers because they want to be able to know and understand, am I going to be able to, make my truck payments or pay my bills or, whatever that might look like. How does my family going to, really fare? And the predictability of the pay is important. Now, I think where carriers kind of get in a little bit of a pickle is when they start being just maybe leading the driver in a way that, you can earn up to, this much. And then it ends up, the reality might be a little different. Maybe that's only their top 1 or 2%. And there are pay transparency laws in place that kind of do help the drivers from that standpoint. But yes, I would say predictable pay. What is the number one? Benefits is listed as well, and but those are kind of the top ones.
It's interesting you mentioned the predictability thing, and I realize this is kind of outside the scope of the survey, but there is a move afoot to try and get truckers covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, to where they would get overtime for over 40 hours, which most of them are working. Is this need for predictability that they expressed indicate a need for something like that? Because it just seems to me that trucker pay is so variable right now that you just may not know what you're getting week to week.
Right. And I think that's exactly what it boils down to is the week to week predictability. Now, as far as all of the legalities and regulations around some of that, I'm not exactly sure impact-wise what type of impact that might have. I think at the end of the day, how recruiters are communicating their pay is critical. And also once the driver's hired, really making sure, do I understand my pay stub? Like that's one of the things that we hear a lot is, oh yes, I get, this is what you told me as I was going into orientation and how I would get paid. But now I'm looking at the pay stub and it makes no sense to me. And so when it messes with the predictability of that, I do think that it's definitely, something that the carriers have to look at and make sure that they're taken care of.
You've kind of referred to something right there I did want to ask you about, and that is in terms of retention, you did make a number of recommendations or key takeaways regarding basically what carriers need to do. Can you give us some other examples of things that carriers can do based on what you're finding that would help them to retain drivers?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, communication is critical. Like that's one of the things that comes up. How you communicate your pay. Are your driver managers and your fleet managers responding in a timely manner? Are they responding at all? Like one of the big complaints that we hear from drivers is I'm getting no response. And so that's something that I would definitely think about. And just really making sure that you have communication in place, even if, let's say you are still in a freight downturn. I really think it goes a long way to say to a driver, you know what? We're bidding on this business. We're hoping that we get this freight. We're hoping that it impacts you and your miles and your pay. But this is what we're doing to improve things. Or let you talk to the load planner so that they can understand. At the end of the day, I think communication is pretty critical. And, then there's things like equipment, making sure that upon assignment, if you're assigning someone a truck, that it's in good shape, that the previous driver's stuff isn't still in it, just what we would think of like low-hanging fruit, simple things can really go a long way.
Absolutely. And certainly I've heard a number of drivers say that over the years. I want to move toward the group who are not looking for a new job. Did you get any indication about why they are staying where they're at?
Yes. So a lot of people just said, listen, I'm happy where I'm driving. But I will say one of the things that really caught my eye out of this response. So if you answered no to I'm not looking for a job, why are you not looking? And 21.5% of them said, I'm waiting for the economy to improve. So that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, that the economy really does kind of dictate retention sometimes. So as the economy improves, we're going to see more and more drivers kind of go, okay, maybe I'm going to look around now and just see kind of what's out there. So that was interesting. Some of them said, I've retired, so we'll take those out of our database, small percentage. But most of them were just like, I'm happy where I'm at, or I'm going to wait for the economy to improve.
That was Priscilla Peters, the Chief Marketing Officer of Conversion IA, talking about the survey conducted by her company in conjunction with PDA, the professional driver agency, that looked into how important things like pay and home time are to truckers. We'll have more of that conversation after a short commercial break, but in the meanwhile, you can read the actual survey results online. We'll have a direct link on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the headline or photo at the top of the page. That's where we keep all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers we mention on the show. Again, that's at landlinenow.com. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At TruckStop, we've built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on TruckStop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Landline Now, welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Priscilla Peters, the Chief Marketing Officer of Conversion IA, talking about the survey conducted by her company in conjunction with PDA, the professional driver agency. That survey looked at how important things like pay and home time are to truckers. We now continue that conversation in progress. When they do say they're happy where they're at, do we know what specifically where they're at is making them happy? I mean, can we suss that out from, the results of the survey?
Well, I mean, I think a couple of things is you could go back to, to really looking at what are some of the top concerns that they had for those that were looking. So, you could say, out of all of the ones, reasons why folks were looking, most likely that list is better for the ones that are not, I would say. But at the end of the day, I think, from a retention standpoint, and our partners at PDA do a lot of research on this. But the kind of big three I always look at are pay, home time, equipment, and then just the whole idea of culture and respect and where that falls. I will say over the past year, we've seen culture come up more. Like, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were talking to drivers, you didn't hear drivers talk much about company culture, right? Like, it wasn't a big, talking point, if you will. But today they're paying attention, I think, more to those types of things. So, I don't know. I would just call out a few of those.
Okay. One other question that's intrigued me, you were looking at the balance between pay and home time and what people's priorities are. And I'm curious in regard to that, when you asked if they would apply for a job with reduced pay to get more home time, what were the results there, and what does that tell us in terms of drivers' priorities?
Yes. So the results were this. So the top, there was, we had 5 different options that they could say. So, and like you said, the question was, if you were applying for a job with reduced pay, would you consider that if the home time was better? I think at the end of the day, what the data tells us on this one is that 40.8% said, I would not accept reduction in pay no matter what with home time. Like they just said, I'm not even really open to it. But the others, like somewhat likely, I prefer to maintain my current pay, even if it means less home time. That was 12.2%. And then 18.9% of them were just neutral. I don't have a preference either way, which to me tells me they're still open to it, right? And then, over almost, 30% said they're either somewhat likely or likely. Like I would consider it depending on the specifics. I will say that, in this post-COVID era, if you will, the whole idea of work-life balance has become more and more important to drivers than it did previously, I think. I think had we asked this pre-COVID, these numbers might have looked a little different. But because, folks got used to being home more and that just became more of something that was valued, then I think that, that's where some of these numbers landed. But I mean, at the end of the day, what the data is showing us is that around 59% are saying, I'm open to it. It's unlikely, but I'm open to it. And 40.8% are just, they're not interested.
Oh, it's interesting. I took kind of a training many years ago, and it was kind of based on a business class that is offered here in the building where I work. And one of the things they talked about is what is someone's goal in their business? And for the most part, it's feed the family, pay the mortgage, pay the bills, food, clothes, shelter, the very basics. But you mentioned that work-life balance kind of thing. Is this, and I don't know if you went this deep into what groups were leaning which way in terms of, say, age, but is this a generational shift that we're seeing?
Yeah,
in terms of priorities?
That is very interesting because to answer your question, we didn't dig that deep into it, but I will tell you and to be honest, just as a leader in my company, we're not a trucking company. But just even from an age standpoint there's definitely a generational difference where, I'm a Gen Xer, if you will. And, work-life balance for me, I don't, it's not that I don't value it. It's just, it's never really been as big of a deal for me as it has for some folks that I work with that are in younger generations than I am. And not that one's right and one's not, just how we grew up, our values, like how we look at things. I think you're definitely onto something. I think it's for sure generational. And I think we'll probably see this. And one of the things that we are seeing is, fleets are going to a much more regional model than they used to. And I think some of that has to do with drivers are really saying, I want to be home more. And they can't operate their business without having their operations be more regional than traditional over the road where they're out 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
Okay. You mentioned company culture earlier. And I noticed that you asked whether the truckers surveyed feel valued and appreciated in their current position. And although more than not did feel that way, it's a nearly even split. You also asked how many were earning more now than a year ago, and most were not making more. Again, looking at the statistics and the other numbers, to what extent in your mind does this help explain some of the turnover that we see in the industry over the past few years?
Yeah, I think, I think as an industry, we've enjoyed a little bit better retention rates over the past couple of years than we had previously. There were years when it had been 100% or right at, or even more for some fleets. And that, that has gone down. Matter of fact, there's some organizations used to track turnover rates, and they don't even really track it as much anymore. Obviously, it's certainly a big deal. But yes, I would say, I always say drivers are, in my mind, they're cautiously optimistic. Like, we ask them, did you earn more this year than in 2024 than in 2023? They said no. However, they're optimistic about 2025, right? And so that's kind of an interesting caveat. I do think that culture does come into play. And, back to your note on generations and how that's kind of playing out among the driver population, I think as, new generations kind of come in to fill a wider gap of that age that we talked about earlier, I think you're going to see culture become even more important. And you're beginning to see fleets like really hone into it. But to be honest, those leadership in those fleets are also now their younger generations kind of coming in as well. And so it's kind of an all around interesting dynamic that I think is going on. But I always say drivers, I feel like, are cautiously optimistic. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully 2025 is better for all of us.
God willing, yeah. That was Priscilla Peters, the Chief Marketing Officer of Conversion IA, talking about the survey conducted by her company in conjunction with PDA, the Professional Drivers Agency, that looked at how important things like pay and home time are to truckers. Again, you can read the actual survey results online. We will have a direct link on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the headliner photo at the top of the page. That's where we keep all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers we mention on the show. Again, that's at landlinenow.com. Peters and I did briefly discuss one other topic, and that's whether or not the industry is experiencing a driver shortage. Peters, who has 26 years' experience in driver recruiting, says she does think a driver shortage exists. Among the reasons, she says, are things that she's observed over the course of her career, including factors such as truckers who are aging out of the industry, some who left the industry for good during or immediately after the pandemic, the effect of the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, which has removed a significant number of drivers from the industry, and the fact that the driver shortage consistently ranks near or at the top of carrier concerns in the ATRI Top Industry Issues survey. She also said this, quoting, "When you look at the overall picture, I don't think if you lined up a set of fleet executives and said, 'Do you believe there's a driver shortage or not?' very few of them would say there's not. OOIDA has consistently said there is no driver shortage, but rather a retention problem, in part because of low pay and bad treatment." And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a division of the U.S. Department of Labor, said in its monthly labor review for March of 2019 that economists would not regard high turnover rates and the associated problems of recruiting and retaining drivers in the long-haul truckload sector as a long-term shortage. Some of the factors that would indicate that include the laws of supply and demand. Basic economic theory says that when something is in high demand but in short supply, a shortage, the price of that thing, in this case what companies pay a driver, goes up. The concept is also cited by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in their report. But driver pay is at historic lows, especially when adjusted for inflation, and while it does fluctuate, it has been low for some years. The ATA contends there is a shortage and puts a number to it. Over the past several years, that number has ranged from 60,000 to 80,000 drivers short. However, figures from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration indicate that roughly 400,000 new CDLs are issued each year, the bulk of them Class A. And while Peters agreed that, in her words, those numbers don't jibe, she said it would be interesting to dive into the data regarding employment numbers in trucking to see where new CDL holders are getting employed after they obtain their license, whether it is in trucking or some related industry such as construction, and if that indicates that trucking is missing some potential drivers that are, as she says, falling through the cracks. For Landline Now, I'm Mark Reddick. One of the things we like to do on the show every day is remind you how important it is for you to be in contact on a regular basis with the people who represent you at the federal and state level. It's very important, and a lot of people get the attitude that when they call, it sounds like the people they're talking to don't care or aren't listening. But in fact, they very carefully track what people are calling about and how many people are calling about that and which side they're taking. So it's very important for truckers to get in contact so they hear more from you than they do from people who are trying to work against you. It's very easy to do, not hard at all. All you have to do is dial one phone number. That's the U.S. Capitol switchboard. It's 202-224-3121. Once you call that number, you just give the operator your zip code. They can connect you directly to the office of your member of the U.S. House and both of your U.S. senators. Again, that phone number is 202-224-3121. And you can also make contact with those lawmakers by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. At that website, go to the button that says Contact Your Representatives. On the right side of that page, you can compose an email and send it to the people who represent you in the House and Senate. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you're hauling freight and running your own business, you need to keep track of some basic facts and figures that can determine whether you succeed or fail. And that includes finding the freight and how much money you can make hauling it. Today, Landline Now's Ashley Blackford will bring us some of that information and get some insight as to why things are happening with the folks from TruckStop.com. Here's Ashley now with a report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Brent Hutto with TruckStop. Brent, starting off with current market conditions, how are things looking?
Well, I tell you what, my theme this week was "Life in the Fast Lane" by the Eagles. Big Eagles fan, but it's the freight never slows down, and freight volumes continue to be very robust, and rates continue to show indications that they're going to continue to come up, which that's good for all of us that move and make a living off of moving freight, and so that's a fantastic thing. The marketplace, just in general, from a data standpoint, is doing what it normally should do. It kind of removed. We had this high spot during the holidays, and it actually extended 2 weeks longer than it normally does, which shows strength in the market. That'll be kind of my theme for this week, which is continued strength. The sort of pressure in the marketplace moved back below 70. Well, about 50 to 55 is the normal, so we're still above what the normal sort of pressure. And then what I mean by that is that load posting volumes kind of went back up again, so it's only maybe about 3% below normal, which means it's normal. Rates stayed at about 228 overall, with van kind of correcting back down, and that's come down from 210 to 201. Flatbed went up about 4 cents to 232. Refrigerated dropped from 247 to 237. There's going to be ebbs and flows in this market, as you and I have talked the last couple of weeks, that you're going to have some ups and downs in rates. So just watch them as they sequentially move up, though. And that's really the key. Fuel dropped a little bit, too, so it just ebbed a penny. There's going to be lots of changes in fuel because of all the negotiations that the new administration is going to have. So if you're a trucker, kind of watch that from the standpoint of how you're going to negotiate fuel with in the ways in which you buy it. But the promising thing is the thing we've talked about the last few weeks is the outbound tender reject index continues, and that's the contract freight that's rejected on the contract amount, the contract rate that they were going to move it at. It continues to stay above 5%. Now, remember, if you're a trucker out there, if it's below 5%, that's the outbound tender reject index. That's a FreightWaves measurement. If it's below 5%, we have less freight in the spot market, which means your rates are going to kind of stay the same or go down a little bit. If it's above 5%, you're going to get more freight in our marketplace, and that means your rates will go up. So this week, it just barely dropped below 7%, which is good because it's been above 5% for the last 18 straight weeks. And that's really, really promising and continues to be promising. And if you're a trucker out there, watch that figure, because I watch it. Tell you what, TruckStop, we watch it very closely because it mirrors the spot market.
All right. What are some of the top regions and lanes from last week?
Yeah. So what I would say is you and I talked about this last week, Ash. There's some changes in some things, like because it was for quite a while it was Texas, and then Texas to anywhere, and so kind of cross border into Texas, and then Texas to many locations. But we're continuing to see many changes in the marketplace, like for instance in van, freight out of Florida, freight out of Portland, out of the West Coast coming in, freight from Memphis back into Texas. You see on flatbed, you see Texas freight and flatbeds. You also see some Chicago freight going like to Minneapolis or Atlanta freight going to Nashville. So what you're seeing is the marketplace strength beginning to kind of level back out, where there's lots of really good marketplaces. And this is why I've been so heady or so optimistic on the marketplace. And so just overall rates kind of modulated back and forth, and then load availability is been changing, but there have been some really big increases year over year, and predominantly in the South Central, and that's good because that's kind of in the South Central and the Southeast are kind of the industrial parts of manufacturing. So when industrial manufacturing comes up, trucking does really, really well.
What are some important industry points that owner-operators should be aware of?
Right now, if you've noticed in the last year, the Federal Reserve dropped the overall interest rates down quite a bit, like almost 2%. And so that's really good because that makes money flow better. Well, right now, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, said, okay, we're going to leave the target interest rate where it is because inflation is being managed really, really well. And that typically means that our country is more optimistic about what's going on because there's more money being invested privately into things because people are optimistic about what they can get in return on their money. So if you're a trucker, watch how the Federal Reserve looks at things, because if they don't change the federal interest rates, then that means our economy is doing well, and that means that they know that consumers are buying more goods. And why is that good for trucking? Well, 90% of goods hit a truck. So you watch that, really important. And you also want to look at like our gross domestic product. Gross domestic product, it kind of ebbed down a little bit, but it's still like in that mid 2%. And what I mean by gross domestic product is when we're at 2% to 3% as a country in growth, Ashley, that's really good for trucking. All right. And so, and it's been that way since even before the new administration came in. We kind of went all the way through post-COVID in the last 24 months of really good 2 to 3.5% growth, which has been great. This is why trucking kind of continues to it's not like receding, even though it's a difficult rate marketplace. So that's it. And I think the last thing there's been a lot of talk about tariffs and things, but I think most of that is just positioning by our present administration through President Trump to kind of make sure that the other countries that we are connected to and do business with or do commerce with are really playing at everybody's best interest. Because if you think about it, our current administration really wants to kind of block all the challenges that might be coming into our country. So I'm not too worried about the tariffs. I know there's a lot of talk about that. I'm not too worried about them because in the end, this is a giant economy and it doesn't change quickly. And so tariffs kind of move back and forth pretty quickly, but our economy doesn't change very quickly.
All right. We've got about 2 minutes left. I know you touched on this earlier.
Today.
Yes. You touched on diesel prices earlier. How are those impacting the market?
Well, I'll tell you, diesel, if you're an independent owner-operator, you own 1 truck or 2 trucks or 5 trucks, then the way you negotiate your fuel is really important because you want to get a fuel card, a discount card, or a fuel credit card that allows you to buy it at a really good market because the medium-sized fleets and the large fleets all buy it like it's a commodity. They buy it at big discount rates. You see the number on the billboard on the highway, and big trucking companies don't pay that. They pay a futures price on fuel. But if you're a small owner-operator, two things. Number one, find the best way that you can buy things at discounts. There's groups out there that have good discounts, so make sure that you're able to buy fuel at a good discounted rate. Secondarily, make sure, this is actually, I'm so glad you asked this question. When you are negotiating with a broker or even with a shipper, if you know the national fuel surcharge index amount, which right now it's 44 cents per gallon, so that's like 6 cents above prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and when oil became an issue from a pricing standpoint. Just know that when you're negotiating that, if you see a rate that says, if you see a rate that's like $2.30, and you know there's a 44 cents of that rate is the fuel surcharge index, you need to negotiate above that 230, 235, because you can say, well, the fuel surcharge index has been increasing and it's above the normal in the marketplace. I need 5 or 6 cents more per mile, and that way you can land on something that's more like agreeable between two parties. In other words, because remember, every piece of freight is a negotiation, not just some of them, but all of them. And the better you know how to negotiate, if you're an owner operator, the more profits you'll make and the more you'll enjoy your enterprise of trucking. But yeah, fuel is one of those things where you got to have it. It's your largest expense. You're going to spend between $75,000 and $100,000 a year on fuel. So you really need to know how to manage it. On top of that, and on top of that, make sure you've got a great optimizer in your program to make sure you're buying fuel at the right fuel tax amount in the right states that you're hauling in. Another super important thing as you run your operation, to make sure you're paying the least tax on the fuel that you're utilizing in the states that you haul through. So, man, I'm so glad you asked that question, because there's a lot of maybe new truckers to the marketplace that might not know that well enough, even though they do have to pay that tax, but they may not know how to really optimize it the best for their operation.
All right, Brent, thank you so much.
Hey, Ashley, it's always great. Thank you for what you and Landline and OOID do for the American trucker in the marketplace. It's an honor to be a part of what you guys are doing.
Thanks. That was Brent Hutto with TruckStop. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.